Hello? Hello? Hi, if everyone could come in and take their seats, we're about to get started. Okay, welcome back from lunch. We had a great set of presentations this morning, and hopefully you're energized and settled in for another set of incredible presentations. So without further ado, I will introduce the home team.
Great. Hello. Welcome back after lunch. We are super excited to be here. I'm Deb Gunther from the Methuen Home Team, and I'm here with Tim Millett-Parks and Sandy Mendler. The Home Team has been collaborating with our community partners to identify resilience strategies that are about both and. So they address both structural inequity in the Bay Area by meeting the immediate needs of housing and health, and they nurture a living shoreline that protects residents and regional infrastructure. So we're going to start with a short video so that you can meet those community partners and hear directly from them. These are community advisory board members, many of whom are here today, and they're going to join us for the Q&A, that worked with the Home Team, and you'll hear about how resilience and sea level rise strategies can be a powerful social justice tool.
People have their own perception on North Richmond.
This community have a lot of strength, swag, personality. It's a lot of beautiful people here.
If you look at the same issues that these communities faced in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they're still here.
People of color, black folks migrated here. It was the only place in Richmond back in the 1940s when they migrated from down south to work on the shipyards. The only place that black folks can be housed, the closest to the refinery, and then also our sanitation dump.
We need to start acting today. Sea level rise is coming.
And if we're gonna really talk about climate justice, then we have to talk about housing, and we have to talk about tenant rights, and we have to talk about all these other issues at hand.
When you're actually out here, you feel something totally different. And I feel like we have worked so hard over these years, historically and just, coming up, as a young person out here. We've worked so hard to gain so many resources on our own.
There's been a lot of discussion here in North Richmond over the years about having affordable home ownership, and a couple of opportunities come to mind. There are a number of small vacant lots in which we can look at various models of ownership.
We'll take those empty lots and, create businesses, not only homes.
People used to come all over from the Bay Area, San Francisco, and all over to the various clubs that were located here in North Richmond for the music.
It's a new way of life. Yeah. People out here are used to renting, and once they get their own, it's a whole new responsibility about it. They're gonna care for it. They're gonna love it. They're gonna nurture it. As it's their own little baby. We're the frontline community up against Chevron, so we probably have more asthma toll rates than anybody.
Like the pollution not just coming from Chevron, but actually all the cars and the freeways that we have.
Es muy importante que haya árboles, ¿verdad? O sea, eso está comprobado que entre más árboles haya sembrados.
Trees and biofiltration together is going to be a real service to this community.
Like a double whammy, like killing two birds with one stone.
The reality of sea level rise is here.
Start working on that now so we can be able to support our communities in the future.
There's a lot of vital infrastructure that's on the water's edge and immediately inland that's also going to be affected and threatened.
The whole sort of bridge idea is so motivating because not only does it involve community development, but also a connection to our nature.
Kids can go out there and play, and they get to be out in the wild and have fun.
A lot of people literally from this area don't know that the shoreline is there.
I went to Birdie Elementary. You know, I played in the creeks, but as a kid, I didn't know what I was playing in. They wasn't teaching us about the creeks and things, so we was kind of like oblivious to the fact that we actually had this nature in our backyard.
Para que los mismos padres, la misma comunidad camine por ahí, le sirva a uno para distraerse, puede salir a caminar tranquilamente y es algo bueno para la comunidad.
Struggles that we have in North Richmond as far as like air quality, as far as like sea level rise and things that's like really damaging in our future. You know what I'm saying? We get to be a group of people that come together and strategically plan things so that we won't get hit hard in the end, you know what I'm saying? And that we will have a future.
North Richmond is our home.
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 So from the beginning, we've really approached this idea of home broadly and to include social and ecological systems. I want to just share with you some of the other values that came through this process with the community members you just met. And first is the idea of adapting in place. And as you heard in the video, the community was really forced to live here at the Bay's edge, so occupying the Bay Edge has really become fundamental. So how can we design infrastructure to be compatible with people to really be a health and wealth asset for the community rather than a drain? There's also the building agency with to make the choices and to actually be able to choose whether to come and go. It's the whole idea of building agency through health and wealth is really paramount in this whole resilient solution in North Richmond in particular. So each design idea you'll see has a health and wealth generation element that's built into the investment. The community has been shut out of these opportunities for a long time, and this is a very real example of how we can build up equity as a region. So just to make that point, stabilization, we really see that as a sea level rise strategy, and the ability to create jobs and housing, that's adaptation. Third, the process itself is really an important outcome. We really heard from the Community Advisory Board members that a lot of really wonderful things are coming out of the process. So a lot of the next generation leaders who you met are meeting the older generation leaders and learning from each other. New partnerships have formed. Residents have had the opportunity to think long-term, which they really appreciated, and keeping focus on the direct community benefits has been something that they've noted. We also are coming together around this broader idea of home. So rural areas have been using cooperatives for a long time, as this certificate from 1962 shows. The idea of pooling resources to provide direct and long-term benefits is embedded in the design for housing, land trusts, lower utility costs, and all of those are intended to help slow displacement. So we know that we need to streamline investments. So even coming up with that dollar to spend on hazard mitigation and to get the terrific return on investment, which is the $6 saved in post-disaster, is a challenge. So how do we choose? So our team used a benefits methodology to link the anticipated investments on the left in the community to see how to get to the greatest number of benefits listed on the right, and then focused with the conversations about which of those tools and strategies really create the most benefits. And so the economics are critical, but we also want to keep emphasizing this bottom-up power of the community and highlight the value this group provides as a model for the region, as they are really pouring their heart and soul into nurturing their home.
Hello. I'm going to pick up from there and talk a little bit about, in some more detail, some of the strategies that were just sort of touched on in the video that we worked in tandem with the community members and with our advisory board to develop, so this nurturing of North Richmond gets to move forward. And so, North Richmond is a low-lying place that is largely cut off by infrastructure, and is also home to a really rich ecology, a really rich ecosystem where San Pablo Creek and Wildcat Creek meet the bay interface. And the focus of the strategies that we developed with our community process were around sort of four major notions, as you were picking up in the video, hopefully. The first being Thrive, which is really about housing affordability and wealth building. Filter, which is focused on air quality and stormwater flooding. Grow, which is a strategy that's combining infrastructure protection, living shoreline, and community community amenities. And Relate, which is our word for categorizing an increase in connectivity, physical connectivity between North Richmond and the region. So just to go into a little bit more detail on a couple of these. First, one of our big filter strategies is focused around air pollution. North Richmond has substantially higher rates of pollution than Contra Costa County, than the Bay Area average, than the California average. And so part of our filter proposal is in looking at some of the vacant lots and major thoroughfares and increasing in those areas the urban tree canopy. The focus is on tree species that are proven at filtering PM2, the big contributor to critical childhood asthma rates. And these strategies are encompassed within sort of three sort of ways of implementation of it. One through air quality parks in the larger vacant lots, another through increasing a canopy through greenways along major roadways, and the other is sort of the idea of tree nodes, which centers around the protection of existing old growth trees within the neighborhood blocks and protecting those as new development might come online. This is looking at the corner of Richmond Parkway and Gertrude Avenue. It's a critical entry into North Richmond. And we're sort of envisioning a sort of densely canopied park that can also serve for stormwater filtration thanks to its low-lying position within the neighborhood, and can also ease the sort of visual and psychological impact of the refinery and the parkway on the neighborhood. Other groups have been thinking about these air quality issues. The West County Toxics Coalition, which is headed by Dr. Clark, who you met in the video, has been working on this from a social justice aspect for years. Excuse me. The Watershed project has been looking at tree opportunities also, and the potential of this strategy really requires integration of this idea with those efforts, and also looking at auto circulation within the neighborhood, the potential to maybe rework some right-of-ways to make larger areas for the tree planting, and also studying how diesel trucks are routed in and around the neighborhood currently, and that's work that the county has ongoing. This is a view along the Richmond Parkway, where you also see the bridge that was talked about by some of our friends in the community in the video, which is not only a critical pedestrian connection, but also has the opportunity to really be an icon for the community. And good work is already underway from the county and East Bay Regional Parks looking at this potential. The next element to talk about is from our Thrive set of strategies, which is focused on affordable housing and wealth building. This map is showing the vacant lots within the neighborhood zones in North Richmond. And our strategy here is to sort of look at flipping the script a little bit on the sort of traditional way you might develop an open lot, getting away from the image on the left there where you see, sort of the standard single-family home, and thinking more about it in terms of small lot splits to make the most out of the vacant lots in terms of access to ownership and affordability. And then the second strategy is through the idea of a land trust, where the land itself, which is often the driver of increased cost in home ownership, could be held in a trust, and then the family or the individual just owns their home, and it's an important protection against displacement. We took on one of those vacant lots. This is at the corner of Grove and Uramita in North Richmond. And we started to see how some of those affordable housing strategies can sort of layer up with good green infrastructure, with safe routes to school, with increases in the circulation for pedestrians. And so it's a little bit of a flip of the script of the traditional, which has an eye towards a return on investment. This is really more about a return of benefits to the community through the land trust. And then sort of the final one to talk about in a little more detail is from the GROW set of strategies. And this is focused on a horizontal levee and living shoreline idea between San Pablo Creek, which you see to the north there, and Wildcat Creek to the south. There's critical infrastructure here, the West County Wastewater Treatment Facility, the Richmond Parkway, some large tracts of vacant land, which are seen as important to the sort of future economic engine of the region. And so the alignment of the levee that you see here is largely in concert with a conceptual study that the wastewater treatment plant is also looking at. So it's bayside of the wastewater operations with slopes that allow marsh to migrate uphill as waters rise. The alignment then turns back at each of the two creeks to meet with some existing flood control projects that the county has already brought online to reduce the creek flooding. And this also allows for the continued flow of sediment from the two creeks towards marsh accretion. In addition to that sort of initial and critical protection at the bay edge, the strategy also envisions the ability for the levee to be breached in select zones to be able to create additional and critical marsh habitat between the creeks if that ends up being a desire in the future for the community and the county. So just a sort of quick view of the potential of the horizontal levee as opportunity for research, as opportunity for job training, as opportunity for increased pedestrian circulation along the top. And then over time, if some of the vacant industrial land could be converted over towards muted marsh and other stormwater controls.
So, like the design ideas Tim just described, our implementation is also designed to promote multiple benefits. These are strategies that restore opportunity while restoring ecosystems. We have an awesome community advisory board that worked with us on design and implementation and also identifying key partners in the community. And as we worked together, we really felt this was important. Instead of focusing on return to capital, we're working together to create a return to community. This model builds health, wealth, and social cohesion. For example, we're intentionally working to stabilize housing costs with permanent affordable housing to enable greater household savings and spending within the community, building wealth and enabling local ownership. Working with the community, these projects rose to the top for short-term implementation. Stabilizing housing is urgent as home prices are increasing, rising rents are driving displacement, and all of those challenges will only increase over time with investment in the community. 2 housing initiatives are planned in the short term, one focusing on the larger lots with the conversion of the Los Deltas public housing project, and one focused on small infill lots to support increased density and affordability by design. Contra Costa County will lead the community process for the large parcels, and the City of Richmond has expressed an interest in leading on the land trust formation and the small lot development. This is a great opportunity for multi-level governance with the county, the city, and the community working together. The last 3 are urban greening projects that will improve air quality, moderate temperature, and provide greater access to the shoreline while recasting the outside perception of the community as a healthy and thriving place. Local partners include the Watershed Project and Urban Tilth. As we explored long-term goals, a barrier we have noticed is the need for overarching integration, especially when folks just want to get things done. As a convener of the discussion around resilience, our role was to bring parties together to focus on cross-cutting initiatives. For example, the Integrated Water Management Plan will build on substantial work that's already been done to address flooding, enhance the creek systems, and develop an innovative horizontal levee to protect the wastewater treatment asset. Through the RBD process, we've been working to develop a more comprehensive levee along the shoreline and to promote circular economy interactions, such as expanding water reuse as a resource for the farms and local businesses. The Health Action Plan will address critical issues of air and water quality. Contra Costa County is just embarking on their biannual health assessment and is interested in collaboration. The compact North Richmond neighborhood, the residential neighborhood, provides an ideal study area for measuring the impact of strategically located and selected tree species to filter diesel exhaust and industrial emissions, and sensors have already been placed throughout the neighborhood. The proposed urban forest plan will also support opportunities for green jobs and scientific research. Finally, the Equity Framework Plan is a really important part of this process, an essential step to address the history of disinvestment with mitigation funds and to protect long-term affordability. We envision a rigorous community-driven process to address governance, metrics for success, and tangible programs like local hire and support for local business to drive a process of reinvestment. As we explored funding, our goal was to identify new approaches to address historic inequities. Key concepts include a green mitigation fund to catalyze initial investment and development of a land trust and social impact bonds to support development of permanently affordable housing. North Richmond has been identified as an opportunity zone, which should help drive investment in social impact bonds as a tool to leverage private capital. A community facilities district is planned with tax increments on commercial and industrial properties only, and a number of grant opportunities have been identified, including funds from Measure AA, the Water Bond, Cap and Trade, and the Air District's Community Air Protection Program, or CAP. The proposed mitigation fund is important because it places the burden of payment for clean air and water strategies outside of the communities struggling with those impacts. The fund will support green infrastructure as well as programming for a resilience hub to help residents with home ownership planning, local hire opportunities, access to available incentives, and energy upgrades for PV and renewables, et cetera. Combined, these strategies will contribute to greater health and well-being, more affordable living, and future opportunities for North Richmond as a place for innovation and an engine for the restoration economy. Stepping back a bit, these statistics highlight the 2 urgent funding challenges facing the Bay Area. Investment in affordable housing has decreased dramatically, and the cost of adaptation to sea level rise is substantial. The question is how to prioritize funding to protect against future sea level rise and also build the housing that's urgently needed. Our view is that the public investment in resilient living infrastructure, together with private investment in locally based ownership and reinvestment strategies, is a formula for success. That's the both and that Deb talked about in the beginning, restoring opportunity while restoring ecosystems. Finally, what does all this mean for regional policy? The traditional approach sees a dichotomy between areas for development and conservation. We invite all of you here to imagine with us a time in the future when Plan Bay Area would identify priority resilience areas, places targeted for ecosystem restoration together with housing, jobs, and transportation, places to develop integrated frameworks for environmental, social, and economic resilience.
So just to sort of wrap it up, I wanted to share a quick sort of personal anecdote, personal story from our very first CAB meeting, our very first Community Advisory Board meeting. We asked our members of our community group, what do you love about North Richmond? And all the answers were very inspiring, but there was one that sort of had a particular resonance over the next, or these most recent months. Princess Robinson, who you met on the video, her answer to what she loves about North Richmond was, quote, our struggles. And what became clear to us, to the design team, was that this community, which has faced down structural racism, disinvestment, historic flooding, and has endured these challenges because they know how to adapt. These leaders they've created an urban farm. They're leading restoration on the creeks. They're already piloting green infrastructure, and so they're ready to really fully engage in this resilience work because they already know what it takes to thrive in the face of daunting challenges. And so North Richmond and other Bay communities that have faced this kind of deep and long-standing inequity, they've already developed this sort of personal resilience and adaptation skills, and we think they're ready to show the rest of the region how it's done. Thank you.
Sorry.
Great. We have our team, other team members joining us, and our Community Advisory Board members as well, from East Bay Regional Park, from the Flood Control District, from San Francisco Estuary Partnership, from the City of Richmond, and our team members, Integral Group and Urban Biofilter, and Alta Planning. So we're ready for questions.
Thank you so much for a great presentation, and wonderful to read about the work. It's very holistic in its different layers that you presented. I'm wondering if there is, I'm very fascinated by all these different approaches to financing that you presented in the end, and also the combination of the long-term framework planning combined with the here and now solutions that you are coming up with. Are there any sort of precedent in the US to this approach that you are presenting, or is this how new is this, and how innovative is it challenging the current systems? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep. Oh, I have a mic. Actually, the City of Richmond is one of the leaders in this area. They've already created a social impact bond. They've already been exploring land trusts. There are land trusts throughout the Bay Area, actually. Many of them are related to natural resources, and some of them are related to housing. So I think there's expertise in the community, actually, in terms of an experimental stage right now. But I think there's a really interesting willingness, and there are many smaller communities that have done smaller scale implementation. But our thought is that in the Bay Area, because housing is such a crisis, and because we're at such a tipping point in communities like North Richmond, and I think as we look at all these projects that are taking gray infrastructure to green infrastructure, it's going to be a pattern. Is what happens, like how can the communities that have lived there see those benefits and stay and be there? And the strategies that are used in downtown San Francisco just don't work and shouldn't be applied in communities like Richmond. I think we want to protect the affordability and avoid the flipping of assets that happens otherwise.
Fantastic. Can I just add to that question then and ask, sort of, in your opinion, what are the biggest barriers to start using these different models?
I think one of the biggest barriers is that there's not a profit driver behind it. So what gets it started? And one of the beautiful things about RBD is that we've been invited to insert ourselves into a potential process simply because we want to use our skills to create better outcomes. So we didn't come with a profit motive. And I think the problem is there's not a concentrated profit motive. It's a more disaggregated kind of benefit that that has to get initiated in a different way.
And I might add, one of the other barriers that we noticed that Sandy actually mentioned in the presentation was the idea, and this is true for many resilience and sustainability related projects, people in the room know that often it's the integration phase that nobody wants to pay for, but it's probably the most important phase to make happen because that's when you can find the things that work the best together. And so I think that is one of the things that we see as really being valuable is to bring all those plans together in a holistic way.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the work, of course. I have a question that relates to this. I have the feeling that because you don't know this, but we read books of hundreds of pages before we go here. So every team presents a full strategy. But both in the book and in the presentation, what is missing, and that's interesting because you start with the video of home, ownership, very locally, community grounded approach. But the strategies you put forward are very generic. Could even, you present them also. We can do this everywhere. So where does the specificness of this approach actually, become, this is North Richmond. So I'd like to hear it because I think you know it, but you just haven't shared it with us. And I really would like to have that sensitivity, out there, because I think between your generic concepts of health, wealth, and equity, the great ideas of the trusts and the funding and the approaches, and then the need for that on the regional scale, mixed with this idea of home, when does it touch the ground and the hearts of the people and become a very local or, a North Richmond project? And local is not the right word.
We talked about that a lot, and maybe Tim would like to respond to that, because we felt like a lot of these very specific kind of common strategies, actually the innovation is in how we combine them, but I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Sure. I mean, I think what you said is it. I think it's somewhat in the combination and how they come together on, specifically in North Richmond. I do also think that, just to sort of think about the part of your comment about, okay, well, these are sort of, generic solutions in the language you used. North Richmond is a place that was, developed without, quality electrical grids and without adequate stormwater drainage and without name it. And so while, those are strategies that could be implemented a lot of places, those kind of just like good urbanistic and good ecological thinking is missing there because of the cycles of disinvestment that have happened there. And so in some ways there's a kind of equity question there, I think, that while it seems like, oh, that could happen anywhere, it's like, why doesn't it happen here? I think that's sort of part of our thinking.
Yeah,
and I think that's the analysis, so I agree. But when you move ahead, it becomes a something, I don't, process project that is really typically North Richmond. So what is that?
All right, and Sequoia was whispering in my ear too, so we had the same little mind meld here, and because y'all haven't been out to North Richmond, I mean, there's an urban farm. The space between the two creeks is open space that's industrial and agricultural, right next to a fairly dense little neighborhood. And so there's and then across we have they call it affectionately Trash Mountain. There's a huge waste facility, and there's the industrial facilities. It's a very different landscape, and it's got this gritty industrial that's becoming a green, gritty industrial environment. And so it's really a distinct place. And I think it's exciting. Like when I go out there, I'm excited because there are the creeks, there is the farm, there is the opportunity for people to start businesses. Like there's space for, the reason this wealth building idea can work is because there's still space there. And so there's a sense of potential, and that's something the community spoke to a lot too when they said what they loved about the place. They love this idea of potential. But we could give you a mic. You might have a thought, because you whispered in my ear about the farm. Let's hear from Sequoia.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sequoia, and I work in the mayor's office, and I was pleased to be on the community advisory board. I would just add to that a lot of folks have been doing the work, and these are the people that have been on the CIB. And for example, the farm was a community-driven process, and it's far exceeded our expectations of what it could become, and the team is really kind of coming in to support the efforts that are going on with the watershed project, all the things that were out there. But I think that's what makes it unique. It's a lot of people that have gotten together to make things happen, and so joining in with those makes it uniquely North Richmond shoreline area.
Yeah.
So I think it would help in this presentation if we saw that in context, right? So, because I think it becomes, I want to ask you, where is the block where you're going to break down the 120-foot lot into 4 30-foot lots and create that? That looked like a nice thing. Is that situated? Have you located that so that you could actually advocate and continue that? It's partly mapping, to understand how this whole thing is. It's a little bit of a difficult scale because it could be generic again, right? Here are these generic places, and where does it situate? But when you're talking about the park that's between the two situations, then how does that then connect to the next thing? Because your fourth thing was about connection. And how does it all connect back up? There were these different systems operating, but how does it reconnect? And then the other question I've already asked, which is, where is this stuff? I know you've situated the bridge, but have you situated the experiment on the blocks? And I want to, one more question really, and you take which ones you want, Deb, but the change mechanism. It seems like it's occurring without threat. It's just a general kind of deterioration of condition, and not, and climate's changing, and I don't think they're going to shut Chevron. I don't really see Chevron in the story, except they're giving you this bad pollution. But where is this going to be in time? The park image you had was a beautiful image, except the cars are the same. The cars aren't the same when those trees are mature. So where is the dimension of time in this story?
Yeah. Well, I think to go to your question about the vacant lots, so there are so many, and we did map them, and there are opportunities there but there is like a standard size, and that represents kind of the standard size. I think to your question about the urgency of change, I think what we noticed that is really striking, and maybe Josh wants to follow up on this, is it's a historically African American community that is now 60% Hispanic, and so there's a whole culture being lost that we heard from the community is definitely one of the reasons why we want to emphasize things like a heritage walk, where you can actually document the community leaders and the history that's happened there, because it's a shared American history, and it's there. So how can that get highlighted? I don't know if anyone else wants to talk about the change.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to address the first question. I think the short answer is yes. We looked quite extensively at evaluating the various vacant lots, both through GIS data and then with our partners, local community development corporation doing affordable housing, as well as the Los Deltas site and its distributed former HUD housing. So the whole proposal for those infill sites was very carefully evaluated against there's actually a current relocation plan happening. So residents are being relocated for this master conversion project. And we know that there is insufficient affordable housing funds to tackle all of those in a conventional kind of delivery method. So there's a lot of enthusiasm around these other notions of small lot splits. And a particular, kind of to get to the point of what is the identity and the history of this place, the sort of ad hoc nature of people building their own homes, adding on, running a business out of the garage, doing ADUs before we called them ADUs. All of that is there, and that's in the fabric of the community. Unfortunately, right now, that's at such odds with policy. So we have code enforcement kind of shutting that down. So there's a lot of excitement around these particular innovative models that are very much community-driven and would allow that startup business out of someone's home to actually operate within a zoning ordinance that allows for it. So there's a lot of analysis, a long answer, to the sites that were identified, as well as these alternative housing concepts.
I'm really fascinated by the advisory board. I think it really seems to have added to your process. And so I'm curious to learn about the future of that board. And then also, it seems like that so many of the strategies are building off of the things that were already there, which is awesome. And so I'm wondering, does the board itself, the members of the board, feel as if they have the tools now and the agency to be able to take, like you're excited about the vision, but do you feel like you have the tools to be able to really scale up and break past some of the things that have maybe kept them from having these far-reaching impacts?
Sure. So, yes, we started in a place where we were already really connected, and I think having the team come in, we were like, okay, show us what you got. We already have been doing a lot of this work. Listen to our stories first before you decide what you're gonna do with us or for us or whatever, on top of us. So I feel like a lot of humility came forward. And my question kind of throughout the process and on phone calls with Sandy and in meetings with our planning directors and other key folks within the city at least, is how are you gonna support us after this is over? Do you just go away? Or what's your deal? What are you committed to? And I'm confident that the team is committed to helping us find funding, to continue to provide some great models and tools that we can utilize. We have really cultivated there's a lot of room for folks to come in, especially to the city of Richmond, and partner with us. And I feel like this team is going to continue on as a partner, and they have really done a great job of hearing our stories, and I look forward to continuing to see where that goes and in that partnership.
Yeah, good.
Hi, my name is Josh. I'm with the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, and I've been working in the North Richmond community for a very long time. And a lot of what has come out of this process was, frankly, started probably 20 years ago with various projects that were separate and distinct and wish list items for various constituencies. And we went through a process where our organization, in partnership with the community, helped develop what's called the North Shoreline Vision. And I feel like, and that was with stakeholders and advisors. And so that stuff has been built. We are comrades. We've all worked together for a long time. The folks who are not part of the RBD process, but the folks who've just been there for a long time. There's a lot of legacy work that continues, and it's great that this has captured a lot of those projects, because we feel like, when they are all layered, we are solving a lot of those issues about access to the shoreline, about displacement and the turnover in the community. About protecting those creeks, which the community initially stepped in and protected them from becoming just channelized projects in the 1980s. So, that legacy is still there. North Richmond has its own character, and this is just trying to elevate it and change the story to the outside world who looks at North Richmond as kind of you know.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Yeah.
I really appreciated the specificity of your projects. I really liked them and found I personally interpreted them as very specific and precise and grounded in the place. So congratulations on that. I was interested in the references made towards the end of the presentation about opportunities to expand the circular economy, are also referenced to the restoration economy. And that made me, so rightly so, I think, so much of the presentation has focused around this concept of home, but that's largely been looking at domestic spaces, public spaces. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how the wealth building relates to job creation, and maybe a little bit more of the picture, helping enlighten us about how the role that North Richmond plays within the region's economy.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just start on that. Or you want to start?
I'd like to start.
Yeah, go for
I
it.
think this was a really fascinating, you zeroed in on something that was really an important conversation for us as a team, because it felt very logical to us as an outsider group to say, wow, you guys are doing all these things in the community, and the region needs this. They need to grow plants, they need restoration, they need folks that are in their careers thinking about restoration and all the attendant issues. And the Community Advisory Board really came back to us and said, essentially, we need to grow this at our own pace. That was my interpretation of that conversation. And we need to grow this in a way that is about self-determination and really doing so much more than literally providing goods. And their experience in going outside of the community obviously hasn't been good. So serving the region is not that appealing to them. And so it was a fascinating conversation about that, because it felt like a logical next step, and it may not be the logical next step, or it might be something that ends up being opportunities that grow over time. But at this point, there's a lot to do, sort of in the community to grow that at a pace that makes sense to them.
I think another layer to that, which that's great. I think another layer to that is that in an environment that's been disinvested over time, and there's a desire to build wealth rather than to just receive support, to build wealth in that community, the circular economy does create these great opportunities. There's a waste handling facility that creates compost, but the compost goes to the Central Valley. So not only are there truck diesel emissions, but the farm doesn't get any of that compost, and the farm's across the street. And actually, all of the reclaimed water goes to Chevron. It doesn't go to the farm. And the farm raised their hand and said, we'd like that water, but it all goes to Chevron. And there's also sources of water that are being disposed of in the bay. So that was part of what we talked about with this horizontal levee 2.0, is this idea of a levee that's accomplishing many more things than just shoreline protection. So I think this idea of the circular economy, and the idea Richmond's had great success with local hire requirements and building up trades in the community, and all the dollars that come in to try to keep them and capture them in the community. So I think finding the way to close those loops in terms of material flows as well as employment flows, I think, is a way to literally build do the wealth building.
So, so I think it's really interesting to hear about the legacy work, and that this community's been doing this for years with, and one of you mentioned our struggles. And I think there is so much value in showing how a community like this has done this work over the years. And I guess my question is, how can design support what you've already been doing? I think there's so much to learn from communities like North Richmond for the rest of the region, and it wasn't clear to me which project would be the most helpful. Have you decided which project is going to go forward? And I'd like to hear from the community members which ones they think would be the most helpful.
I would say Maybe I would, I'll jump in, and then if folks want to jump in, I think we heard from the community Las Deltas, the redevelopment of the Housing Authority land that is planned to be turned over